Welcome back to When the Cleats Come Off. I am stoked to have today's guest here. I found her on TikTok, and now I just want to repost everything you post there. But Coach Lindsey, thank you so much for being here.
You're so welcome, Ashley. I'm honored to be here. Excited to chat.
As soon as we set this up, I think we both mutually said, yeah, we just started scrolling down our own pages and we're like, we talk about the same stuff.
Absolutely.
This is a friendship that just apparently needed to happen. And thank God
Yeah,
for TikTok.
we're aligned. Thank you to the algorithm gods for sending us each other's pages, right? It's so cool.
Amazing, amazing. Now, can you share a little bit of your softball journey? You played at ULM, which is pretty
Yeah.
cool. We just had this
Yeah.
connection between Molly, who's the head coach down there, but take us through your softball journey of play.
Yeah, so I played, travel ball and Dixie youth ball coming up. It's interesting in Northeast Louisiana, when I was coming up, travel ball like had just become a thing. So I'm 38 years old, but down here it had just kind of happened. Like everybody was still playing rec ball and Dixie youth, and like the only people that played travel ball were like out in California, right? So I played on one of the first teams in Northeast Louisiana, which is the Louisiana Rippers organization. Played a little bit for another team down south called Louisiana Voodoo, and then played at ULM here in Monroe. And I would say, my softball journey was. I'll just like I'll just be real. It was my whole life. And I think a lot of athletes can relate to this. It like had totally become my identity. My mom passed away when I was young. And so it was this way that my dad and I could connect. And it was like the basis of our whole relationship. And I was completely consumed by softball. It was my life. I wanted to play college from a very young age, and I committed to that. And I was in it, and it was the vacations are your travel ball tournaments,
Yep.
and all of those things. And um, yeah, so it was my whole identity, which, turned out to not be so great later in life. I love the quote that says, what you idolize, you eventually demonize. And that definitely happened for me. I spent my whole life trying to get this college softball scholarship. And then when I did finally get it, which I'm so thankful, right? I was a starter and I played, I was recruited to hit, but I didn't have the mental skills built in. It wasn't being taught back then. I didn't have a lot of balance around who am I outside of my sport? Am I worthy if I'm not productive in my sport? And so when I got to college, I actually went through some of the darkest times in my life, because you have this dream, right? And then you get it, and it's like, oh, well, you caught the tiger by the tail. So now what? So I really had trouble, processing the demand of the sport and really just that performance, your self-esteem being attached to how well you hit and what your batting average is, and if you're in a slump and how many home runs, really, really got caught up in that. And, had a lot of other things kind of go on that were not so great. My softball career gave me so many beautiful learning, lessons about leadership and hard going through hard things, and all of that. But at the same time, I really learned, that this performance identity ultimately is not serving me. And I had to do a lot of work on the other side of that. So much so that my senior year, when I was done with softball, it's kind of was like, okay, I'm done now. This has been my whole life, and I've got to find something else. And thankfully, divine intervention kind of brings you back to the thing that you love when you've gone through some healing and you've really worked through some things. And anyway, started giving lessons again and started coaching at a high school level. I was asked to coach a local high school varsity team, and then that led me into mental performance training, which we can get into, because I quickly realized, man, I have so much to give from what I learned from my experience. I would have killed to have the mental game and the mental skills that I do now, and then getting certified and teaching kids. So long story short, that's kind of the journey up to this point.
Mm, I love that. And I feel like a lot of people that get into coaching just in general, either had a super great experience,
Right.
with an amazing coach and they're like, man, I want to be like them. Or some people had like a really tough experience with a coach and they're
Mhm.
like, I want to make sure nobody goes through what I went through.
Yeah.
Which spectrum do you feel like you kind of leaned on? Maybe both. Like I feel like I have both sides of
Yeah.
this personally. Mostly good, but there was a lot of negative. But what parts of, maybe prior coaching that you had made you want to step into this space?
I think for me, it was really about confidence. It wasn't necessarily anything to do with any coaches. I look back now with so much grace. I'm like, I can't imagine what our coaches like actually went through. I mean, now that I am a coach, it's kind of like when you become a parent, right? You're like, oh my God. Like, I get it now. Like, I get why my parents were like how they are. We're just humans. We're just trying to do the best that we can. Think about the average coach is not equipped with the emotional intelligence skills and the mental skills training and the resiliency that they need. And I loved, actually, it didn't have anything to do with my coach. It was all me. It was
Mm,
me, my family of origin, my headspace, the drama that I was kind of going through personally, and I didn't know how to move through that. Um, so for me, it was really about like, I want young girls to not have to deal with the performance anxiety, their self-esteem being wrapped up in their sport. I want girls to know that they can come out here, they can be a baddie, they can compete, but there is more to life than how they perform. And their worth is about so much more than how they're doing in a ball game. It's about preparing you for leadership and really seeing a bigger picture beyond their sport. So,
hmm So you said you did a lot of work on yourself to kind of get out of that space of softball is my identity. Do you mind sharing maybe what some of that work entailed? Because I know, even when I stopped playing, I played luckily 2 years professionally, which was kind of like this.
wow, that's
It
awesome.
was a fun experience because I was like, I don't want to be done. And then this
Yeah.
opened up, right? And so it was great. But when my contract wasn't renewed, and then it was kind of like
Oof.
you can either try to work your tail off and, go make another team or just get rid of
Mm,
the opportunity that you wanted. I wanted to play in the Olympics, but that was
yeah.
something so far-fetched based on my age.
Yeah.
And, yes, it did happen in 2021, but I wasn't about to like play the guessing game at that
Mm,
point. So I struggled with identity for so long because it kind of just got taken away. And I was like, what now? And
yeah.
it took me a whole year. But I'm just
Mhm.
curious, what did you work on? Because I think it's interesting to know other people's journeys and how they got out of it. And I would love to prepare athletes now for this time because you can't play our sport until you're 100, like you can golf. So, what
Right.
should we be working on?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I just want to validate that it's normal to experience that. I mean, we can say all day long, like you're more than your sport, but it's like also at the same time, come on. Like our whole life has been dedicated to this thing. And then when you're done, I even did a TikTok video on becoming a NARP, which is like they call it a normie, like a non-athletic regular person.
Uh-huh.
Like, oh, you're a normie now. Our whole identities have been caught up in being an athlete and being strong and being the best and doing hard things and being a leader and being goal oriented. It's so difficult. And I even think women experience that outside of sports, being caught up in the identity of being a wife and mom. Who am I if I'm just me? And is that enough? And the answer is yes. Like, you're enough because you're a human, period. And it doesn't, your performance and who you are is not what you do. And so for me, when I got done, I definitely went through that identity crisis of who am I now? What do I do now? And, you know, old dog's going to do the same thing, right? So I started boxing. I started doing other athletic things. I started, I think a lot of former athletes, they get into CrossFit or they come up with something else to kind of fuel that passion. And that helped for a little bit, but the same pattern keeps popping up. I got into law enforcement. I was actually a police officer. I wanted that high demand, high adrenaline thing. Then I got married and I'm a stepmom, so I have a blended family. And I think for me, one of the biggest things that helped me kind of realize that there's more is really going on this personal growth journey. I started coaching, I started doing fitness, started doing boot camp, and I started seeing, I'm not the only one who felt this way. Like what I was saying, I was training women who are wives and moms. Like we're all kind of going through this identity crisis. And I don't know if we ever do, figure this whole thing out, but just really started doing a lot of personal development work. I highly recommend therapy. I think therapy is great. But really just being okay. And oh man, this is still hard. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. Like, I don't know a woman who doesn't struggle with just allowing herself to be.
Hmm
Like it's okay to just be. And I tell my athletes this now too. I'm like, hey, it's okay to rest. If you need a minute, if you need to, take a breath, take a beat, you're allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Rest is our currency, actually, as women. So I think allowing myself to just be and sitting in that discomfort is huge. I think that's the biggest component. And so many athletes need to understand this now. Typically what we do as athletes when we're met with discomfort, it's our human response, fight or flight, freeze or fawn, right? Well, what we've been taught to do is always just steamroll, right? We go right into action to fix it, more reps, more lessons, more activity, more busy, more stuff. And yeah, that can be helpful, but sometimes what you need is to just sit with yourself for a minute. You need to just give yourself permission to be and sit in that discomfort and see what happens in that discomfort and what you really learn about you and be okay with just being with you,
Mm-hmm.
nothing else. So that's all I got for you on that. It's a journey.
Yeah. I mean, that made me just think of the power of a journal,
Oh,
of
for sure.
you, a journal, and a notepad, and
Mhm.
obviously something to write with. But just when you say lean into the discomfort, it is
Mhm.
not easy to set a timer for 5 minutes and just write. Right. Like,
No.
that is something that is so foreign to so many. And I
Mhm.
partnered with a journal company because,
Oh, cool.
he's actually a baseball guy who like encourages journaling throughout the game, but just kind of like learning from mistakes, gaining data, things like that. But when he added the section after a hitting session, he has
Mhm.
a spot to write down the things that you did great and then
Yep.
a spot to write down the things that you can work on.
Mhm.
And if I were to give the athlete the journal, they would skip the great part and go straight to what are the things I need to work on? What do I suck at, basically?
Yep.
Because I think it's probably a more feminine thing than a masculine thing. Like, I think um, I talk to baseball players and, they kind of have their own ego and they're like, yeah, I'm a stud at this. But then
Yeah.
talking about the things that they're not great at is easy for them because
Yeah.
they like that as
Mhm.
in general.
Yeah.
But for girls, I feel like we're so fast to talk about what we're bad at that we don't
Mhm.
even look to see what we're great at.
Absolutely.
And do you have anything on that? Just like in regards to maybe sandwiching it? Like, should we talk about the good first, then should we talk about the thing that we're not great at? Like, how does a female's brain work from what you've studied and researched that can help an athlete just kind of get through the discomfort, but like get used to that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct on the female brain, and I think there's a lot of reasons why that is. Research and studies have shown that a great rewiring definitely occurred around the year 2010, 2012, and it specifically targeted females worse than males because of technology, the smartphone, social media, to where we are more self critical. We are perfectionist. I actually was chatting with a male coach the other day who's coached both girls and boys. And he said, well, you know what? Boys are just too stupid to care. He said it, not me. And he was like, they jump off the roof and it didn't work out. They're dumb enough to just jump off the roof and try again. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, I think that there's a little bit of that to it where, women, there's some conditioning, societal conditioning, there's a legitimate rewiring in their brain. And, I think athletes really get caught up a lot in what I call fix it mode, where they're constantly fixing, they're constantly critiquing, instead of feel it. Well, how did you feel in your body? What actually worked well in this moment and how can you recreate that? And I think, female athletes get in their heads so much about just nitpicking, fixing after every single rep, after every single thing. What did I do wrong? What do I need to fix? How do I need to do it? Instead of really sitting for a minute and going, okay, it's number one, failure is a part of this process. Failure is learning. What is the data showing me? This isn't personal. Just because I've whiffed at 3 balls in a row or I keep pulling the outside pitch doesn't mean that I'm a loser or a failure. Okay. It means I've got some data to work on here. And then can I just sit with this a minute? Can I think, objectively here? And how does this feel in my body? Where's my body awareness here? So I think it's about, realizing that our brains are different and then what you focus on grows, right? What you draw attention to is the only thing, that you'll see. There's something called the reticular activating system, which basically means it's kind of like when you want a new vehicle. Say my dream vehicle is a Jeep Wrangler. That's what I have. So I see
Mm,
Jeep Wranglers all the time, right?
yep.
My color right now in the season is this lime green color, so I see lime green everywhere. So it's our brains are wired to look for that, to look for what we want it to look for. So if we're constantly looking for things to fix and problems to solve, then that's the feedback loop that will happen over and over again. So if we can teach young girl athletes, can you look for what you did good first? Can we train our brains to in the positive? If gone unmet, they'll naturally lean towards the negative. So I hope that answered your question, but I think it's all of that. I think it's knowing how you're wired, number one. Number two is, okay, well, how can I do have the power to reprogram my brain? And then number three, can I trust myself instead of constantly fixing and looking for outside voices and all these different people trying to tell me how to fix myself? How does it feel in my body? And can I look at that objectively? And I love what you said about the journaling practice. After every, I think you said after every hitting session, doing that is so important. That's a key mental skill that we teach athletes. One thing that we do with athletes after every single game, and they know it's coming too. So we're already training them to be self-aware, is after every single game, whether we win or lose, because everybody just wants to do this sometimes when they lose, but we do this whether we
Hmm.
win or lose. Okay. What's one thing that you did great? Awesome. Now, what's one thing that you could have done better on? Okay. Number two. And then number three, which, how was your energy? How was your preparation before this? Where do you feel like you needed to be to do those things energetically? Okay. And we're talking about that from a standpoint of this is what we're going to go work on in practice next time. So awareness is so key. And in the beginning, when we do that with athletes, sometimes they're nervous. They're like, oh, am I going to give the right answer? Oh, I don't know. And so we really have to coach them through, like, there's no wrong answer. This is a safe place. You've got to be aware if you want to be elite. So,
Hmm. I know
yeah.
there's a lot of coaches listening that are like, man, that would be a good thing to do after games. Yes. So if you haven't gotten your journal out, coaches, please do that and take
Yeah.
some notes.
It's like it's some, and here's what I've learned, like the yelling and the lecturing, they're not in the headspace to hear that after a tough game.
No.
That there's some things that, if there's like if there's like coaches, okay, but like what happens if you're constantly lecturing and yelling instead of letting them talk? I've seen this happen over and over again with girls. They'll get in the huddle and they are dysregulated, they are checked out, they're not making eye contact, they are somewhere else, they are, I mean, it's fight or flight freeze, right? So they're just like totally shut down. Nothing that you say, it's like you're just you're just speaking to a brick wall, it's just bouncing right off them. There's nothing that you're saying that's getting in at that moment. The best thing that you can do is listen, and let's be a team, and let's talk about, what happened together. So super
Hmm.
important.
Yeah. I've talked about that with parents also, like in the car ride home.
Ooh,
Um,
girl.
I think our next hour of this interview is
Preach.
going to be car ride home conversations.
Let's get it.
But I had Sue Anquist on, and this is way back in season one, and she was talking about how the only question you should be asking your kid is if they're hungry and where do they want to go eat.
That's right. Where you want to eat, baby. What you need to drink. That's right.
And that doesn't mean you don't have a conversation later about what we're going to work on and improve. But like you said, like, especially after a loss, like a tough loss, first of all, they're angry and they're probably hungry. Like, we know how much this game takes away from our, like, just physical body, right? So
Absolutely.
sometimes just like giving a little fuel, get some food, get something to drink. And then later on, maybe it's 24 hours later. And if you don't have that much time, maybe it's just the next morning. Like, there's a good time and place to have a deep conversation about what we're going to do. When do you think
Mhm.
that should be?
Oh man. Well, look, first of all, I have an entire script for parents on this exact situation. If you sign up for my email list, you'll get like a free
Mm,
audio, like I break it down. But essentially, you want to let her lead and you need to know your role. Your role is to be a neutral support system in this process. It's not to coach her, okay? It's not to immediately run in and try to problem solve and overparent and helicopter parent, because I think that's probably the biggest thing with a lot of parents. They don't want to see their kids hurting. They don't want to see them in pain, which I totally get. but you have to give her space to process on her own without your influence, because that's how she's going to develop emotional resiliency. So I love, hey, where do you want to eat? Another one is, hey, I'm here for you. And that's it. And you give her space to process. You give her space for if she wants to talk about it. You have to let her lead in those moments. And then when she does say something, she does open up. I mean, this is just basic, communication. It's we want to listen, without giving opinions or advice. We want to normalize how she's feeling. We want to name the emotion. And then we want to ask her what solutions she has. This is the thing. I think that as parents, and we want to immediately run in and fix, problem solve, give advice, coach, because we can see it, but she's not receptive to it right now. And you're not doing her any favors. And so, what we don't want to do is immediately start, blaming the refs or blaming the coaches or blaming her teammates or just throwing, fanning the flame, right? You want to be neutral. You want to listen. You want to let her talk. And then when she does unload on you, you know, it's like, hey, I understand where you're coming from. It sounds like you're feeling really frustrated, and I get it. It's understandable. That can feel really tough. What do you think you need to do about that? What's your plan?
Hmm.
I mean, I'm always like, empower the athlete to come up with her own solution. And then, and only then, if she's like, well, I don't know, it's like, well, then I would probably, then there's your opening to say, well, would you like mom to give you some suggestions or some feedback here, offer some, possible solutions that we could talk through? Or do you just want me to listen and vent? Right. So it's like, that's always the question that I'm leading with. Hey, you want me to just listen right now? Or do you want help and advice? 9 times out of 10, they just want you to listen.
Hmm.
Like they know what they did wrong. They know what's happening. They just need a safe space to listen and talk and feel supported. And that is your role as the sports parent, is just to support. Don't give your opinion. Support and provide opportunities. And I know it's so tough because we all have that little helicopter in us that just wants to problem solve and make sure she's safe and make sure she doesn't feel anything and make sure it's, not hard. But listen, if she doesn't learn the emotional resiliency now, in college at the next level, it's going to be 10 times harder. Like she doesn't even know challenging right now,
Oh
as you
my
know,
gosh.
Ashley.
Let's
So it's
talk
like,
about the transfer portal for a second. I'm just kidding.
yeah,
I mean, okay, so we both played. I'm so glad you mentioned this because we both played high level softball,
yep,
and the transfer portal is different now.
yep,
Athletes are able to move and be able to play like right away.
yeah,
Um, and it was so hard. Like my freshman year was the hardest year of my entire life. Like
mm,
I picked up bad habits. I did things that I wasn't supposed to. I was on my own, spreading my wings for the first time and like making mistakes all the time. And it was just so hard.
yeah,
And everybody goes through that. And you're so right that if I wasn't trained to be resilient, I would have just wanted to go home,
yeah,
you know, instead of stick to
absolutely.
it and like, and just keep
Yeah,
fighting, keep grinding through it. And I'm so glad I
100%.
did.
Yeah, well, and here's something that I truly don't know what the answer is to this. We help athletes a lot, excuse me, with mental skills with this. But one thing, and I'm sure you've heard this as well, Ashley, so many athletes right now, they have a major issue with challenging coaches and tough coaches. And when I really go deeper with a lot of them, it's really yelling, coaches that yell a lot,
Mm.
like coaches that are yellers. And it almost like they're crumbling at that, like a coach that's really militant or is a big yeller, is big energy and expects a lot. And I'm just like, I don't know a college coach that isn't that way. I mean, it's very, very rare. I don't know if any listeners recently watched the Full Court Press documentary. Did you see that with Caitlin Clark and Camila
No.
Cordero? So it's on ESPN. It's phenomenal. It takes you behind the scenes of their college journeys, right? So like the best, women's basketball players in college, and it shows their coaches too and practices
Oh, I
and
need
their
to see this.
and I am like, I hope every athlete is watching the best of the best coaches and how tough they are. I'm like, if you can't handle someone yelling, I mean, it's like, I don't, Just like,
Yeah.
again, if
It's
that's
the
where we're
coach's
at,
job to get wins. Like they get fired if they
yeah.
don't. It's high level,
And
high
now
pressure.
let me say this, there's a huge, huge difference between a challenging coach and an abusive coach.
Right.
Someone that is berating you, abusing you. There is emotional abuse is a real thing, but there's a big, big difference between abuse and someone who is just challenging, someone who is, very intense and a little bit more, very regiment and structured. And, so I just am like, we have to develop. I mean, I just find this is my personal opinion. I think so many athletes are coming into college teams very unprepared mentally for what they're about to experience from a team culture to, like you said, and they're on their own for the first time ever. There's so much change, there's so much expectation, there's so much pressure. And unfortunately, many athletes are just not equipped. And one thing that I always tell parents a lot about mental skills training, mental skills need, it's not a question of if your kid needs it, it's when. We work on the how we work on the roof when it's not raining, right? And I think there's this stigma sometimes that only athletes that are struggling need mental skills. And I'm like, no, this is a baseline for performance. Because think about this, Ashley, and this is probably you. This was the case with me too. Like we were like the best athletes growing up, right? Like we were good. So of course we were confident, right? But when you get to the next level, what happens?
We don't know what
Everybody
to
kind
do.
Yeah,
Everybody's
everybody kind
better.
of everybody's better. They're better, they're or the same, so it's like the skill level evens out, but what doesn't is the mental skills. So if you can begin, mental strength training, emotional resiliency now, your athletes are going to have the ultimate competitive edge and their coaches are going to love them. Um, at the next level. So,
Yes, absolutely. I would love to go back to parents here for a second because you were mentioning, conversations that we can have.
mhm,
I think there are also important things that parents should be talking to their athletes about. And you said you were talking about it on Twitter or TikTok,
yeah.
talking about what should parents be talking about? Is it their goals? Is it, like you said, support? Is it accountability? Like what is their role? I know you said to be a neutral support system,
Mhm.
but when your athlete has a goal, then what is your role as well to help them get
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, so definitely, listeners, I break this down on TikTok. You can go watch the video, but a very low effort, high impact conversation to have with your kid is really around their goals and that this being their journey, not yours, and that you'll match their energy for sure, but at some point they have to take ownership of what they want. And if their goal is to play at the next level and their goal really is to do that, then you will match that energy step for step and provide them opportunities. But I think so many times parents want it more than their kids do. And their parents get in the habit of, overparenting and helicoptering and nagging and pushing. And do you have your stuff? And I'm going to sign you up for this camp. And I'm going to do this. And they're in on 3 different teams and so many different coaches and lessons or playing multi-sport. And the athlete is kind of just reacting to all this. And actually, there hasn't been a conversation between parent and athlete where we sit down and say, hey, honey, where are you at with things? And what do you really want? And then we listen and really give them space and permission to talk about, like, is this what they really want to be doing? And I think for sports parents, that can feel kind of tough because they're afraid their kid's just going to want to quit. And then what does that mean for them? Right. Like we can't want it more than they do. We can't project our own dreams onto them. They have to lead in this scenario. And that's going to involve watching your kid fail. That's going to involve watching your kid go through some hard things, but she's going to come out on the other side the better for it. So I think having conversations around this, your sports journey is yours, not mine. You have to lead. And I think the best time to do that is, really around 11, 12, 13 years old. So I think that's the crucial conversation that she's having. But once you get your athlete very clear on what her goals are, then you have permission to remind her of that. So it's like, well, sweetie, I know your goals are to do this, this, and this. Is what you're doing right now, is that supporting your goals? Is that helping or hurting your goals? You tell me. What do you think? right? So we're
Hmm.
empowering our kids to start thinking that way instead of nagging or like, oh my gosh, like, you forgot your stuff again. Or like an athlete that is like passionate and wants to play at the next level, nobody's having to tell them to do stuff. Like, y'all, I slept with a, can't even believe I'm remembering this. I slept with a book that Mike Candrea wrote about softball skills and drills. Like, this is back before social media and the internet, right? I had his book on my nightstand as a teenager.
That's amazing.
Come on. So it's like, if they want it, you're not going to be able to stop them. And we just need to have clear conversations around, what they really want. It'll save you so much time and energy.
Kind of Mike Andrea, I remember my dad and I would watch YouTube videos from him
Yeah.
over and over and over because he had like really good stuff.
Mm.
Man,
Yeah.
talk
He's
about a
such a
dream guest
legend.
for the podcast. Mike Andrea.
I'm believing it.
We need him
Manifest.
on. Yeah,
Come
let's
on,
let's
Mike.
manifest it. I mean, I do have a couple connections that I think he knows, and he's retired now. So
Yeah, he's got all the time. Come
yeah,
on.
how would he say no? Okay, so I feel like what we were just talking about has a little bit to do also with burnout.
Yeah.
And I think we're kind of in this epidemic of burnout. It's
Yeah.
happening. It's kids that are going all in on multiple sports sometimes, like they
Yeah.
don't get any time off. I mean, you literally said rest is our currency. And I feel like that is probably a contribution.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
countercultural, right? Because we want these kids to be busy. We want to keep them out of trouble. Heaven forbid they just can't have these kids just sitting around the house. I hear it all the time. So,
we can't
anyways,
take
I
a
didn't mean
month
to.
off of softball. It's like not allowed now.
Yeah, yeah.
It's so hard though, because people think if you take a month off, now you're a month behind. So what do we
Mm,
tell them?
yeah, the FOMO. Okay, so your question is really like, what do we tell them about burnout and how to rest and
Yeah,
all
what
the
do we need
things?
to be doing better?
Again, goals. What does your kid actually want? And I talk a lot about multi-sport athletes, and it is quite the controversial topic. Like,
Totally.
there are so many, it's so interesting on TikTok. I'm like, why is it always the men that are coming for me on TikTok? Like, they're
Hey,
so,
but they help the algorithm, so keep
yeah,
coming.
I'm just like, keep doing it. Let's get into this discussion. And I do think number one, I do think multi sports is super important up into a certain point. And again, if the athlete is happy doing all the things, if the athlete is happy and healthy, have at it, do it. In my experience, though, there comes a certain point where that athlete is one of the two things is suffering. Either she is getting more injured, her body is hurting, it's hard, she's having a difficult time doing all the sports plus academics plus a social life plus all of these different things. Again, if we go back to the research on the difference in brain and how they take in information and respond to stress, the emotional resiliency, we're dealing with a different animal here. I think that so many athletes would be relieved for an adult to say, hey, sweetie, do you want to just pick one or two? How can we take something off of your plate so that you can actually get some rest and maybe get some therapy on your body, like start doing some of those things. So you know I think it's about uh you know sorry, my dog's barking. I think it is about giving your kid the option to rest, and that is an option for you. I think it's about goals, and I think it's about mental skills training at the end of the day and teaching them to use their brain on purpose.
Absolutely. And before we were recording, we were talking about, being able to handle stress. And
Hey, Ashley, hold on. Let me just let him
you're
out.
good.
Sorry. Sorry. I have to
It's
edit that
okay.
out.
You're fine. That's what editing's for. But before we were recording, we were talking about females and being able to handle stress from what comes to sometimes a mental health crisis, because, we have social media where we start comparing ourselves to other people. Some people are playing multiple sports, their school, like you were
Mm.
saying, like all these different things. How can we help our athletes manage their stress? And I know you mentioned, just saying, what can I take off your plate? But are there any other things? Is it time limits on our phone? Is it,
Ooh,
I mean,
big one.
shoot. I need that
Yeah,
personally.
there's so many different things. Well, I do and agree with the first two things you said. Yes, what can we take off your plate? Um, Definitely time limits on phone. I don't even want to get into the research around that, but definitely 90 minutes before practice and before games, that phone needs to be gone. There is scientific evidence around performance with that. At our on our squad, we have cell phone jail. Where everybody has to put their phone in a bag and they don't get it till after practice or after the game. And it just gives them a minute to reset. But the biggest thing is investing in mental skills training for your kid and teaching her, number one, how her brain works, that nothing is wrong with her. There's nothing that she needs to fix in herself, that she's not her thoughts. However, she does have power over her thoughts. So we really teach athletes a lot around reframing what they're thinking, that you don't have to believe every thought you think, that feelings aren't facts. All that is data. And we can actually reframe our thoughts for performance. So some common ones, are I'm not, I hear kids say this all the time. They're not getting enough playing time, so they think their coach hates them.
Mm.
It's like, no, my coach doesn't hate me. By the way, you don't have any control over what your coach does or doesn't do. So helping them reframe to, when I do play, I'm going to go out and give it my all. So really teaching them that they can reframe their thoughts, teaching them skills around visualization and breath work. And, how the biggest one is the ability to bounce back from mistakes quickly. Failure recovery is, in my opinion, one of the biggest keys to talk with girls about. Because think about it, if we've got an overthinking perfectionist who's always in fix it mode, who's doing all of these different things, who's on the edge of burnout, failure to her, quote unquote failure, which could mean so many different things, is like the worst thing that could happen in her mind. So she's literally living her entire sports journey afraid. That doesn't translate to elite performance. That translates to burnout. That translates to kids hating their sport. That translates to kids feeling like they can never be enough because the demands and the pressures are so high and they cannot fail. Failing is so bad. I sit down with girls all the time. I'm like, tell me what's going on. Tell me how you're feeling. They're like, tell me what you're worried about. And it's, I don't want to let my parents down. I don't want to disappoint anyone. I don't want anybody to be mad at me. They're not none of them say, they're not even focused on the game, really. They're not even like, I want to be the best person or the best player. I'm so frustrated at my swing. They're like, I don't want to let my parents and my friends down. I don't want to let my teammates down. I don't want anyone to be mad at me. I'm like, who is they? Who is anyone? Like, who cares? So I think teaching athletes how to respond quickly to mistakes, which I actually teach a method for that for failure recovery, and really neutralizing what failure means, what making a mistake means. And if you can do that, what happens is you have athletes that play all out. You have athletes that are having fun again. You have athletes that are confident because failure, whatever that means in their mind or making mistakes, isn't life or death. It's just a part of the game. I would say we're either winning or learning. So teaching them, really having conversations around failure and mistakes and how they can respond quickly after that so that one mistake doesn't turn into two or three or they spiral. I mean, we've all seen this happen, right? Kid makes one mistake, and then she's in her head and that turns into two or three, or, it's then that turns into something else. And then it starts to domino across the field or across the team. And so I think failure recovery and being able to objectively look at performance instead of personalizing it so much is key for sports performance and their mental health.
Hmm. One of my favorite quotes is just fail fast. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the teams that when they fail and make the adjustment quicker, it's the athletes who can make the adjustment faster. Like that's the moneymaker right
Yeah.
there. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
only difference between really a like I always like to use analogies of like that's the MLB, that's the starter, that's versus
Yeah.
the single A guy, you know?
Yeah, that's the difference in playing something and being a ball player. You have to have a relationship with failure. And softball specifically, in my opinion, softball and baseball, the odds of failure are more, and you have more time to think about the things that are happening. So it's like we don't want to be bringing our at bat onto the field and vice versa. It's like meet the next play. We can't be ruminating on something that's already happened over and over again. So teaching, just, the average athlete doesn't have these skills of this language of, how does my brain work? How can I reframe my thoughts? We say things like, "Hey, flush it." Okay, well, if they knew how to flush it, they would. They don't have the skill set. Like if they knew how to, "Hey, be confident." Like if they knew how to be confident, they would be confident. So I think that's a big thing for me with coaches is we can, quote these great little Pinterest quotes at them all day and these motivational phrases, but they don't actually have the skills many times, to do these things. If they knew how to get out of their head, they would be out of their head. So I think that's why mental skills training is so important.
Hmm. And as a coach, if you see your defense, let's say, like make error after error after error, and we know that's not a physical thing, we know that's a
Sure.
more of a mental issue. How do you approach your team in the middle of a game?
Yeah. So we teach our girls something we call a reset routine, which is something we use in practice as well. It's not, it's not a magical thing you just use in games, but it's something that they're very familiar with. They're using in practice, they're using all the time, which they can use after a mistake or even, in a high pressure moment or when one error happened, you feel like all the momentum is lost or whatever. And that consists of three things. It's a little bit more in depth, but I'll just simplify it here. And that is a reset word that is unique to each of them, a big deep breath. Breath work is one of the most underutilized skills for so many athletes. And then a physical anchor. So they'll do something, a hand signal, or they'll pick up dirt. It's very unique to each individual. So we'll say, "Hey, reset." We're reminding them to go through that routine right then and there. So they have that to lean on and they feel really empowered with it. So I think it happens before the game. It happens in practice, using these skills. And in the game, it's like, "Hey, we're huddling up," and it's like, "Hey, everybody take a big deep breath." I mean, we're using the skills, right? Do we think in that moment that yelling and lecturing at them and telling them to get their head of their ass is working? They know what they did wrong. Like they know they're spiraling. They need a skill set to get out of the spiral. So it's, "Hey, reset routine. Hey, big deep breath. Hey, let's just remember really quick, who are we?" Identity, right? What's the identity of this team? Okay, remember that. Now let's go. So
Mm,
that's my go-to for it.
so good. So good. Yeah, there is definitely power in being able to teach them how to get out of it themselves. I mean, this is the whole point of why we do what we do is to help athletes just own their own game, own their
Absolutely.
mistakes, own the greatness too. But like
Mhm.
understand that if we let the past be stuck in our head and not know how to get rid of it in the moment, we're not going to be present. We're not going to be able to react and just play the game.
Absolutely. We had a pitcher this past season who that was her big thing. She we had whenever she would have to come in and pitch, that meant our whole defense changed because when she wasn't pitching, she was playing third base. We had a lot of injuries. We had people playing lots of different spots. And so when she would come in and pitch and certain people would be in certain positions, if they made a mistake, it was like she felt like she couldn't trust her defense. And then she was like, things would just be better if I was playing third base. And she would just spiral over this. And the truth, when we really sat down with her and I said, "Okay, tell me what you're thinking, tell me what you're making this mean." And the truth is she did not feel confident in her defense. So then she'd start like placing the ball and just serving it up, then a home run happens. And I'm like, "Well, the home run wasn't your defense's fault." So that ownership over, I don't have control over my teammates and their performance. I have to control my controllables. All I can do is get out here in my position, go all out, do my best, and be a great teammate and work on my energy and, surrender the rest." And I think that that's can be difficult sometimes for athletes, especially females, because I think sometimes we're so energetic, right? It's like, "Well, what is she doing?" Well, that energy within a team can just be so contagious. And, I think teaching athletes autonomy over their own mental game, over their own energy. Just because she's acting some kind of way doesn't mean you have to. And really standing strong in their identity and what they want and what their role is on the team is really, really key. And just owning that.
Hmm. Some of the best advice my dad ever gave me was you play a sport where you are a part of a team, but a lot of times it's just you have to get your own job done. So
Yeah.
if I was
Yeah.
ever stressing about things that I couldn't control, he's like, put your head down, do your work. Because like
Yeah.
when you do, and you do start playing well, that does kind of help your team be like, okay, she's leveled up. I want to level up. It's kind of how everybody
Absolutely.
can get better, but it's not selfish. I mean, which I don't know if you'd label it selfish, but it's kind of important to be a little bit selfish and like get your job done before you can help anybody else.
Yeah, we say that all the time. Do your job. Just do your job. Do your job. Do your job. If you do your job and everybody else is doing their job, we're going to be solid. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. So I loved when you talked about being your coach's favorite.
Yeah.
Um, you were talking about it meaning like, yes, coaches have favorites. Like
No, come
they're
on
not gonna
now.
say it. They're not gonna be like Susie's my favorite. But like, what is it about Susie that would make a coach their favorite? And why is it important to be like Susie?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I just hear so many athletes complain all the time. Well, like coach plays favorite, like they play favorites. I'm like, okay, probably. I mean, like, yeah, they do. I think the question that you need to be asking is why? Like, what? Instead of you being mad at the coach, go to Susie and say, "Hey, what are you doing?" Like that's the marker of a growth mindset. A growth mindset is like, oh, I can change. New possibilities are there. And growth mindset is always looking, if somebody is doing something better than you, instead of you saying, oh, I suck, I'm a loser, or well, at least I'm better than so and so, you actually go to the person that's doing better than you and get teachable and learn and say, hey, what are you doing here? Well, how do you think about hitting this ball or whatever? So that's number one. But I think, most coaches, like we all have favorites. I mean, you have favorites, right? I mean, you have girls that
Oh,
you love to coach. Like,
absolutely.
like
They're easy
start,
to coach.
they're easy to coach. For me, it's like my favorites are girls that are going to compete, that are going to show up, and it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. Their energy is contagious in a good way, and they're teachable. They're asking what they can do better all the time. They're always, and it's not fixing. They're not in fix it mode. They're like, hey, I want to play this position. What do I need to do to be a starting player on this team? Like they have that level of commitment, and they're out there competing. They don't have to be told every little thing to do. They don't need, again, we're looking at kids that are constantly overparented. Okay. If you're doing that, parents, you're now setting your kid up. Now they think that the coach should tell them every little thing to do. No, no. I want kids that get there early. They've got their cleats on. They're ready to go. They know the routine. It's like at some point, like we shouldn't have to be telling high school kids how to warm up.
Hmm.
Like you do the same routine every single time. It's 3 o'clock. Like, let's go, let's get practice started. So they're self-starters, they're competitors, they're coachable, they encourage their teammates. They love the sport, like they hate to lose more than they love to win. That's a big thing for me. So, I think it's girls that are focused and girls that are in it, instead of, expecting the coach to tell them every little thing to do and to be handheld and to be babysit. And, I also think sometimes energy matches are a thing. I think as coaches, to play devil's advocate on the other side of this, we tend to like athletes that were more like us. you know it's
Sure.
like, I love it. Like I was a very aggressive hype player. I wasn't the calm, cool, collected gal. I'm like crazy. I'm like that's my personality type. So I love a lot of hype. I love a Jada Coleman. I love
Mm.
just talk that. I mean, that's me. Okay. And I love to see that in athletes because it's confidence, right? It's swag. Most girls are not that way. We dim ourselves because we don't want to up our friends, or we don't want anybody to look at us, or we don't want the attention. So it took me a minute as a coach to also know that, and this is also back to mental skills, that some athletes don't play their best that way. They actually need to play more relaxed and cool, calm, collected. They that's not where they're in their zone. And I think that sometimes coaches have to confront their own biases. It's like, how does each player play at their best? But, I would say if you want to be your coach's favorite, it's not that hard. Stop complaining about who the favorites are, get teachable, and then have a conversation with your coach around what is my role and how can I be a starter on this team, or whatever it is that your goal is. How can I get
Hmm.
into the lineup, whatever it is. So,
Yeah, rock that role. And I was just thinking about when you were saying this, if you are building a coaching staff, it's kind of important to make sure you don't have a bunch of yous, right? Like
100.
I think you
Absolutely.
see you see the greatest teams, playing at the Women's College World Series. And Mike White, he doesn't say much, right? But I know he has a staff that they are loud, they are like you, like
Yeah.
and it's important to kind of have that dynamic. So one, you can relate to some players, differently throughout the staff and be able to
Yeah.
kind of get on their level too. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was just a
Absolutely.
side tangent that you made me think of. But
Nope,
yeah, I
so
think
good.
that's
Look,
so
my head
important.
coach, our head coach, it's so funny too, just how the universe brings people together. She was a pitcher, I was a catcher and utility player. So the personalities, she is calm, cool, cool. She's like Iceman, right? As a head coach, like nothing bothers her. She ain't, she's just very chill, very relaxed. I am the opposite of chill and relaxed. Now, I mean, I am like the hype queen. I am loud. I'm chest bumping. I am intense. I'm like, let's go, and it's just kind of the perfect compliment because again, we have athletes that, they need that chill, relaxed, this isn't life or death from her. And then there's other athletes like they need that hype. They want the energy. They want this to be fun. So, I think it's so important. But people are not going to be like you. They're not going to play like you. And also from a player's aspect, like your coaches, all your coaches are different, and you have to like learn their style, and you have to get a clear understanding of what the culture is that you're walking into as well. And if you're a good culture fit, that's a big one.
Yeah. The last thing I want to just add to that before I ask you this final question, I know this went by really fast, but it also has a piece of knowing who you are. Like,
Mhm.
you're the hype girl.
Yeah.
It would have been a shame to your game if you would have tried to be cool, calm, collected when that just wasn't your style. I think that's an important thing I
100.
want people to take away from this is like, what's your
Yes.
style? Like, what's
Yes.
what's the way you're gonna play? And here's the problem. When you start owning that style and doing that thing, you're going to get people to say things behind your back and they're going to be like,
Yeah.
she's starting to do great. And now you do get that comparison thing and you do get those people that try to bring you down.
Mm.
Have you seen that recently, with any of your players or players that you work with personally? And like, how are we going to own our sport, own our game without letting other people kind of bring us down?
Yeah. I think it goes back to what are you giving power to? What are you allowing to steal from you? We talk to our girls all the time like, look, I'm not giving my power away to an umpire, to another player that I don't vibe with, to a challenging coach, to a heckler in the stand, to a troll on social media. I think when you enter elite athlete status, you absolutely own your style and who you are, number one. And then number two, you become a boundary queen around what energy vampires are to you
Mm,
and where your energy leaks are and what you give power to. You have to have like the horse blind, the blinders on around what your goal is, who you are, and what is for you. This is not easy. I mean, again, this is elite status in blocking out the noise because you cannot control anybody's opinion of you. You can't. All you can do is be you. And like that quote says, you can be the juiciest peach in the orchard. There's going to be somebody that don't like peaches, so
mm.
you just have to be you, and enter the zero F's club. I don't know if I can say that on this podcast. Like you just gotta like, and I think with maturity and emotional intelligence and awareness, and again, going back to that true identity of knowing who you are, that becomes easier and easier to do with time. So
Hmm.
I think it's own who you are and control the controllables. And don't you dare give an ounce of your precious energy because you don't have a lot of it because you're an elite athlete. It's got to be
Yeah.
reserved for the stuff that truly matters. Do not give an ounce of your energy to that thing. And then just on the note of knowing your style and knowing how you play, I do want to add this. This is elite maturity, in my opinion, especially if you're in the recruiting process. I don't know, we have anybody listening that's in that process or is a sport parent that's kind of helping that process. You need to be very aware of that, of your identity, your style, and if you are a match for what you're being asked to walk into, and explaining that very clearly. And if you have a coach who, some coaches they're kind of can go two different ways where we want everybody to be themselves and play how they want to play. And then there's other coaches that are like, no, this is the system and you will be this way. And I think those are some higher conversations that you really got to have, going into this thing. Again, what is my role here? What is expected of me? What is the culture? This is kind of my style. This is how I play. Is that something that you want? Or are you wanting me to eventually mold me into something different? Now, that also doesn't mean that you're never going to change. You don't have any room for growth. But I think it's going back to, trying to make a calm, cool, collected athlete be something totally different. Like, it's just not going to work. And I learned that early on in my coaching journey. I had a girl who she's naturally quiet. She's naturally, her demeanor is just that way. And trying to force someone to be something that they're not when she actually plays great. She's being calm, cool, and collected for a reason, is really important from a performance standpoint. So I hope that answered your question.
Oh, and more, which I love.
Okay, good.
This
I'm a talker
was,
too.
I did tell her before we recorded, I'm a talker. This could take a while. Of course, I probably have like 40 other questions we could go on and talk
Yeah,
about, but
about this all day.
I know how listeners are. They like their good 45 minutes to an hour, and then we can
Yeah.
maybe dive into some more of this stuff later on. But I want people to know how they can follow you and your work with Elite Mental Edge.
Yeah, so come follow me on Instagram and TikTok. It's Elite Mental Edge, Coach Lindsey. Definitely you can sign up for our email list if you're a sports parent or coach. We've got a free guide on how you can build your athlete's confidence without burning her out, and so many great resources on our email list. And that's the best place to start. I also offer mental performance coaching for athletes and teams, and really excited about some things we've got coming up, just as far as like digital products and courses, and really, again, helping athletes with the mental game and what it really requires to compete at the next level is something I'm super passionate about. So that's how they can get to know me.
Perfect. I'll make sure all of those are linked in the show notes for people to go find. I just want to thank you so much for joining the podcast. I know it was a pretty quick turnaround from, hey, do you want to be on, to us being here right
Yeah,
now?
you're so welcome.
But I do love your work. I mean, you're a constant watch on TikTok for me.
Oh,
So
thanks.
you're making not just, listeners better, but you also made me better through this conversation. Like, I want to run through a brick wall right now.
Yes,
So
hype queen, I did
yes, let's go.
it.
But I know people, they got so much out of this, and I really encourage everyone listening to go follow, even if it just starts with a follow and maybe eventually you start working with her. I think,
Yeah,
like you said, it's just a matter of not if you need to work on it, it's when. So why not
absolutely.
work on it now?
Yeah,
I wish I would have done this much earlier instead of going through a little mental funk myself in pro
same.
ball.
I would have killed to
Um,
have this. I would have
yeah.
killed to have it. And that's why I'm so excited about, getting these skills and this system that I teach in the hands of every single athlete, and coach. So
Mm, your
absolutely.
passion is
Thanks so much.
infectious.
Oh, thanks. Thank you,
I love it.
Ashley.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lindsey, for coming on. This has been a blast.
Awesome. Thanks.